It's 2025, and the world's biggest asset managers are issuing tokens, buying crypto ETFs, fintechs are launching their own layer ones, payment giants are integrating stablecoins, and Bitcoin is increasingly seen as a global store of value. So you'd think crypto has already won, but blockchain has had its false starts. Every chain has promised the same thing: faster, cheaper, fairer systems. For over a decade, though, the results have let people down. Avalanche says it can finally break that trade-off, build a network that confirms transactions in under a second, while also enabling anyone, from a small startup to a trillion-dollar asset manager, to spin up their own layer one with full customization and access to shared liquidity. That's the promise of Avalanche: customization without fragmentation. Do you believe it? Avalanche emerged with researchers asking the same question most Layer 1 founders have aimed to answer: how does one achieve speed and scale without sacrificing decentralization? But they came up with an answer no one else has. In 2018, a pseudonymous group called Team Rocket published a paper proposing something radical: a new kind of consensus. Not proof of work, not proof of stake, something entirely outside of the box. Instead of energy-hungry mining or rigid hierarchies, Avalanche consensus relies on randomness. Instead of asking every computer on the network to check in with every other one, each node has to poll a random set of neighbors over and over until the network reaches agreement. Certainty spreads like wildfire. The result is transactions finalized in under a second, a kind of crowd wisdom. Luigi, Avalanche consensus is about randomness as the core of truth. That sounds a bit dangerous. What happens if the gossip breaks down?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you mentioned, this innovation was brought to market about 6 or 7 years ago, which is infinity in crypto time. And what it really allowed for is, all of the consensus mechanisms focused on all-to-all communication, which means that every single node needed to, at minimum, have a conversation with every other node in the network. What Avalanche brought to market was the ability to reach finality without forcing every single node to have a conversation with each other. And so it does this by using sort of like Bitcoin, probabilistic finality. And most people don't know that Bitcoin actually uses that, but that's why you have those long confirmations post a transaction in Bitcoin occurring. For Avalanche to kind of use, in quote, which is why it's called Avalanche, it starts by a tip and it snowballs into effectively an avalanche in terms of the nodes making a decision on which block to pick for the next one for the network.
And of course, the benefit of having this type of consensus is just a faster blockchain, right?
Actually, it's twofold. It's not only a faster blockchain, but it allows for a truly decentralized blockchain while not sacrificing on speed to finality. You're able to, maintain a large decentralized set of nodes, but still not compromise on the time it takes for each transaction to be truly finalized. And so it's decentralization and speed combined.
Okay, but what if the gossip breaks down? In other words, what are some of the challenges and risks that this kind of consensus can have?
Yeah, I think the challenges are not dissimilar to other protocols, and the validator is actually checking and verifying is the validity of the transactions. And so it's deterministic from that standpoint in terms of understanding that these are in fact valid transactions, and if they are, we can include them in the next block.
Isn't it risky to not have all nodes be a part of confirming transactions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what the beauty of Avalanche consensus is you're able to understand for statistics and probability what the correct threshold is in order to not sacrifice on security, but maintain a decentralized and secure blockchain.
I was wondering, to compete with Bitcoin's decentralization, you can't really do all-to-all. All-to-all works okay for about 100 nodes, 100 validators, maybe 200. And so that doesn't seem secure enough. And so the kinds of approaches I saw other people take, it just seemed deeply unsatisfying. So we started thinking about lighter weight protocols. And so the next couple of years, from 2015 until 2017 or so, were spent just kind of thinking in that sort of preparatory phase, thinking, can I do better? So then this young student walks into my room someday. His name is Kevin Seknicki, and says, hey, I'd like to work with you. And I tell him, no, I don't want to work with you. So he's just seems a little disorganized. And he was like, no, I really want to work with you. And so there was some kind of a headbutting between the two of us. I was like, okay, I have this like flyer of an idea. I have this kind of crazy intuition that maybe it's possible to do consensus without having everybody talk to everyone else. And so how so, right? And so that was the beginning. I outlined for him a very, very rough idea. And I like to think on the margins. I like to think about sort of the extreme cases. And I'll give you an extreme case that's very simple to reason about. Imagine that you want to achieve consensus with a huge group of people, like you're in a stadium. And so you're not going to be able to do all-to-all communication in a stadium full of 100,000 people. That's just infeasible. And I want to build systems that are incredibly decentralized, that have millions of participants. So how are we going to do this? Well, I was saying, look, Kevin, here's something we could try. So imagine that, let's take an extreme example that's easy to reason about. Imagine that everybody in the audience, everybody in the stadium, except you, believe that the decision ought to be 0 or 1, or let's say red or blue. Between the red or blue, everybody wants red. So imagine you do this. You could ask everyone and then pick whatever the majority says. But better yet, why don't you just sample? You sample a small number of people, see how they're inclined, and if they're all inclined the same way, then you kind of go that way. And you'd sample a few times, and if it looks like everybody's headed the same way, you go that way. Like, whoa, this is way better than we thought it could be. But what do we do now? We spent another 2 years or so in that phase of, having done the initial simulations, but kind of stuck on the proof front. It's not easy to reason about systems like this, and we didn't know what to do. Of 2018 or so, that we received the sketch proofs from Team Rocket, an anonymous group that says, hey, we've been thinking about consensus protocols, and they had a very different approach to proving safety and liveness that I'd never seen before. So we saw the proof sketches, and that's when everything clicked for us. We suddenly were like, oh my God, these guys are onto something very, very interesting. They have the insight for how to prove that this system will achieve consensus in a safe and live manner. And so we ended up having some exchanges with the Team Rocket, and ended up guiding them as they wrote the paper. And so we're very, very, very pleased with that collaboration. And the core of the proofs came from Team Rocket. And it was happenstance that we ended up working on the same approach to the consensus problem.
A new consensus mechanism isn't the only thing that sets Avalanche apart. The other key aspect to Avalanche is it isn't just one blockchain. Think of it more like a city with districts, each designed for a different purpose. There's the X chain, like the subway, built for rapid payments and transfers. Then there's the C chain, kind of like a financial district, hosting EVM-compatible smart contracts and serving as the main hub for DeFi and dApps. And finally, there's a P chain, kind of like City Hall, managing validators, staking, and the creation of Avalanche's modular L1 blockchains. The real innovation is you can build your own district, your own chain, tailored to your own needs. On Avalanche, you don't need to cram into the same streets as everyone else. But unlike other build-your-own frameworks, Avalanche's chains don't live in isolation. They're stitched together by a native messaging layer, so liquidity and information can flow easily. Luigi, thousands of customizable chains sounds exciting, but also messy. How do we stop this from turning into chaos?
Yeah, I mean, when we take the position that, life and commerce is messy, and, we need a platform that'll be able to support what actual businesses and developers will need writ large. And so if there is, one type of business that wants to, create a platform that's customizable for their own needs, then we should enable that. In addition, we should enable them to be able to speak to or talk to other platforms or other businesses in the network. And that's why we have the interchain messaging ICM protocol, which effectively allows everybody to build their own chain, but still be able to communicate with each other. And when you layer on top of that Avalanche consensus and what we talked about before, which is its speed to finality, now you have the ability to have interoperability with really fast finality, which allows for it to be seamless and really happen under the hood without really any detection.
What about security? Are all these L1s also sharing aspects of like the main Avalanche chain security?
No, Avalanche takes a position that shared security also means that you have shared risk. And so there's really two sides of the coin there. I think when Stripe said that they wanted to build their own chain, one of the things that I thought was interesting there is they decided not to build on Ethereum in particular, or build on a shared security network. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is they're Stripe. Like, they're worth $100 billion. They don't need, or they don't want to risk building onto another network that's exogenous to what their business needs are. In fact, they can't take that risk. And so, what a network like Avalanche enables is them to be able to customize what they want to their rules without infringing certain constraints on them that they don't want.
The key tenets of Avalanche, this concept of sovereign L1s, and as part of that, we built AvaCloud, which is really a managed service provider for Avalanche L1s, deploy in minutes, run with enterprise-grade reliability, add integrated privacy, interoperability, wallets, gas relaying, data APIs, really do all of this with really total optionality on how to shape your blockchain, really so it wraps around your business rather than be this rigid technology that you have to wrap your business around. So you can take an L1 with no code, launch it in under 15 minutes, fully customized to whatever your needs are. And then you can think of it as a stack of components above that, whether it be precompiles for allow lists or establishing native tokens. There are embedded wallets as a service, gas relayers so that you don't have to expose gas to your users. And then there's a whole privacy suite that we've been rolling out this year to really address privacy for really larger institutions, especially on the financial side, and enterprises where they want certain aspects of the transactions not to be synonymous. In the permissionless arena, it gets a bit more complicated, and I think that's where the concerns are. And what we really see is most of the chains start private in some form and permissioned, and then they have this migration point where they have a plan to go permissionless. Because at that point, stake weight, validator weights, how your staking rules are set, which are totally customizable within the Avalanche protocol, start to matter a lot. And we advise a lot of our clients on best practices there, where to pull different validator sets from, how to organize them, and then of course how to bootstrap and manage them so that they don't get into DOS attacks and things like that.
Why do you think Avalanche has an advantage over those ecosystems, or maybe specifically against Ethereum L2s, which I think is kind of the closest rival, where you can get a lot of liquidity, and L2s also allow you some degree of customization?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the story with L2s comes down to the fact that they ultimately will look to Ethereum. And I think there's pros and cons to both approaches. I think it's a moving landscape and a changing landscape where everybody's innovating on their view of what the marketplace needs and what we need to really scale the industry. So the L2s are, they're less flexible than the L1s as far as you get into native tokens and in the ability to really completely own the stack and customize that stack at a very deep layer, and then not being rolling up to layer 1 at the end of it. That's a key differentiator, and really comes down to what you're trying to accomplish. With the other ones, there's a lot of unique things happening at the VM layer that's really starting to create the ability to scale things through parallelization and other novel techniques. And so, Avalanche is also progressing. You mentioned Cosmos and Polkadot, both early chains that I think were great at setting a path forward. And I think Avalanche is superpowers. They don't stop innovating, and the underlying architecture written back in the white paper still continues to allow for deep improvement at the very base protocol layer. And you're seeing that with a lot of the stuff that will be coming out at the end of this year and early next year on speeding up finality and allowing you to control finality. The parallel execution aspects of it, and then the ability to just get fast receipts so things feel near instant but are finalized on chain.
Avalanche has always been one of the leaders in DeFi with early sort of innovators, and they were also, to be honest, one of the earliest innovators in the landscape of, okay, you actually need multiple blockchains, right? I think probably one of the first to come up with this idea of this network of blockchains that is quite unique to them. And we, as Gelato, we sort of support multiple frameworks of like which type of blockchains you can run, and L1, L2s, sovereign rollups. But Avalanche is quite unique in this sort of like L1 side of things. It's one of the few L1 stacks that is like production ready and is used by a bunch of really high profile customers. That is fairly unique comparing, for example, to like the Ethereum L2 roadmap, right?
Do you think, this is a double-edged sword, like you said. There's this ability to customize your L1s, but it can also mean that you have a bunch of just permission, centralized ecosystem built on Avalanche. What's your view there?
We take the position that we don't want to infringe upon developers and enterprises. We think that there's going to be this heterogeneous type network, but we want them to be able to send messages to each other, to interact with each other, and to also interact with the public decentralized general purpose C chain, which will flourish from all the economic activity from the L1s naturally by being at sort of the center.
Totally, in that aspect of the permissionless open environment, that's at the foundation of everything that we've done and where we've started. And that is, the C chain is obviously that arena where anybody can launch anything. It's a completely permissionless environment. The permissions things aspects we see, they're typically a hybrid, but the goal is always to strive toward permissionless. There's just a lot, like we talked about, there's a lot of risk points that come with that transition from one to the other. But I think everybody's, for the most part, right, everybody's ethos is kind of in the right place where they just don't want some kind of walled distributed ledger technology that looks a lot like what could be done with traditional database models.
Decentralization isn't an abstract ideal. It's about people not having to trust one company, one government, or one server farm to play fair. It's about resilience. The lights don't go out just because one switch is flipped. But decentralization isn't binary, it's a spectrum. So how much decentralization is enough to maintain trust and censorship resistance while still delivering the speed and usability users demand? Avalanche's 1,500 validators and Nakamoto coefficient of 25 hit that middle ground. It's decentralized enough to avoid central points of failure, but fast and efficient enough to support real-world applications. Okay, so Luigi, how decentralized is Avalanche really?
So in this space, this has been a topic that's been discussed for a long time, right? Whether there's specific thresholds of what decentralization is. People look at things like, the Nakamoto coefficient, the number of validators, the distribution of stake. There are a lot of different variables you can look at to understand how decentralized the blockchain is. I think Avalanche is probably one of the most decentralized blockchains out there if you look at those different metrics. And that's, like we discussed before, partly because of the consensus mechanism allows it. It's also because, it doesn't have a very high cost of hardware on the primary network to run a node. So, most people are able to run a node at home and things like that. So it has consistently maintained a high level of decentralization. And that's incredibly important for censorship resistance and resilience, which we think are things that need to maintain on a go-forward basis.
And I think now it's really all about getting the right builders and wallets and new fintechs to build on top of their stack in order to then bring this to the world. So breaking out of our current niche and then getting people in Latin America and Southeast Asia and so forth to benefit from stablecoins, RWAs, and so forth. And this is of course where we are also helping Avalanche as well. That combines all these things into one cohesive solution that then if you want to deploy a chain or if you just want to support Avalanche as a wallet can leverage.
Avalanche has built the city. The question is, Will more people move in?
This is the age-old question in this industry: how do we actually get adoption? And I think what we've shown over time is consistent improvement on this front, right? We started with DeFi in 2021 with Avalanche Rush and getting the C chain adopted. We started building out what were formerly called Avalanche subnets, now Avalanche L1s. We've seen real uptake on that front. I believe there's about 80 Avalanche L1s on mainnet now. Many that are using the interchain messaging ICM protocol to talk amongst each other. So there's a number of different blockchains that are all different use cases using the network. And I think we're starting to see that that's working. To go forward, I think you kind of needed some big unlocks. One being the regulatory front in the US, which has definitely brought in a lot of demand from enterprises and institutions to finally adopt this technology, and we're really seeing that. I would say like the time for that to hit market, usually like 6 months to 1 year from when the decision is made in a corporate to get to that point. But we still have a lot of work to do, right? Crypto is still something that people trade, they think about, but it isn't top of mind for average retail folks these days.
We've seen more and more institutions, companies, fintechs looking seriously into blockchain and crypto in the past few months, and partly thanks to kind of the regulatory unlock. And like you mentioned before, many of these companies have opted to build their own chain. Others have also gone to Ethereum L2s.
Okay.
So how does Avalanche compete in this ecosystem with so many different options where, like Avalanche was built for this very purpose, like for companies to come and build their own L1s. So I don't know, it must be frustrating for the ecosystem to see like Stripe is launching its own chain, Robinhood is using an Ethereum L2. Like, what case can you make to say, okay, Avalanche is the place where companies need to be building?
Yeah, no, it's the right framing, right? Because Robinhood, you did mention, is building their own L2. And we were in that conversation. Stripe is building their own L1. Circle is building their own L1. But when you take a look at that, those are three of the more crypto forward firms or enterprises out there, meaning they've been in the space for a while and they have almost unlimited resources. So they will be the first to actually try to own the stack themselves. There is going to be a bunch of firms that are not so crypto forward that need a stack that allows them to build their own customizable chain out of the box. And there are really only two options there. There's Ethereum and its L2s, and there's Avalanche and its L1s. And I think you're going to see a world where both get adopted. I think we need to get at this mindset that it's a fixed pie, and there are trade-offs between L1s and L2s, frankly. And we've seen the likes of Stripe and Circle decide for an L1, and we've seen the likes of Robinhood decide for an L2.
What advantages do you think Avalanche has?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different trade-offs between the two. Like I mentioned before, with Ethereum L2s, you have shared security, which means you also have shared risk. In L2s in particular, not only do they need Ethereum to continue to operate and not have any downtime and things like that, but they also share in the cost increases potentially that Ethereum L1 might have. So if there are gas increases on ETH L1, those get passed in directly to the L2s, who share and use it for data availability. So if you're a corporate or you're a large enterprise, do you want to take on that exogenous risk in order to build an L2? Or alternatively, you could build an Avalanche L1, have your own chain, customize it to the needs you want, have interoperability and access to liquidity via the C chain, but control the cost yourselves. And so I think there's a little bit of a difference in terms of what you get out of the box, plus the fact that ETH L2s do not have any interoperability in production at all today.
I think the UX is a big part of it. Right now, it's not that easy to use Ethereum L2s. And if you do have interoperability out of the box with Avalanche L1s and kind of this shared liquidity with the C chain, I think that can, if you can get your users a more seamless experience, I think that can be a good upside.
That's what we're going for. I think, if Ethereum had to redo it, they would have been starting from the premise and thinking about interoperability from the beginning, rather than now it's a little bit of an afterthought and will be more challenging to implement.
Avalanche's vision is it isn't about one chain to rule them all. It'll be thousands of chains, each built for a purpose, stitched together into a robust network that grows and adapts to fit business and user needs. Avalanche's pitch is speed, control, and connectivity. But it's also a bet that decentralization and openness on the primary chains can uphold blockchain values, while Avalanche's layer 1s can be more closed and centralized. If they're right, finance becomes programmable at scale. If they're wrong, we'll get a bigger L1 graveyard.
If Avalanche succeeds and tokenizes all assets and brings on-chain all of finance and so on, how do you think that will ultimately impact the end user? Like, what kind of impact do you want to see on real people?
That's such a wonderful question and such a great question. So look, given where I grew up, I did not grow up in the US. There are certain things that I want to do to the world that are not even quantifiable. They're qualitative changes. I want everyone to be able to sleep at night knowing that their assets are safe. That's the kind of feeling that I don't know how to create using any other technology besides blockchain. Any other technology necessarily involves a middleman. Any other technology necessarily involves trusting another human to keep your assets safe. And that's why we have the complicated financial system that we have. That's why we have to rely on courts. That's why we have to rely on regulators. That's why we have to rely on all these processes that are all imperfect. And the only approach I know that doesn't have all of those drawbacks, that is inherently secure, is a system based on self-custody, based on blockchains.
Next time, we follow the money. DeFi on Avalanche, billions in value, real-world experiments, and the question of, is this where the next cycle takes off?